Our next presentation will be from Dr. Roger Minert of BYU Church History and Doctrine. Professor Minert is finishing his 11th year at BYU as a professor of family history. He received his master's and PhDs in German language and literature at The Ohio State University. He's published extensively on Germanic family history, German American immigrants, and the LDS Church in Germany and Austria during World War II. He recently finished a book that dovetails with the topic of his presentation today, Johann Huber and the First Branch in Austria.
Some of us have pictures of Mormon heroes at home. Big picture of Brigham Young, picture of Captain Moroni, Mary Fielding Smith. One of my Mormon heroes is Johann Huber. Read about him for the first time many years ago, and then intensely in the last 5 years, as I've spent a lot of time living in Austria, traveling and studying in Austria. As I finished my book, Under the Gun, The History of the LDS Church in World War II in West Germany and Austria, his name was once again prominent. He made it in life into World War II before he succumbed. I had to confront the problem for this presentation today of taking the text of a large book and crunching it into a 20-minute reading. I decided to forget that. I didn't want to present to you something akin to Two Musketeers or Tale of a City. So I'm going to review with you here the result of my research over the last 4 years that includes the very fortunate discovery of 800 documents and photographs and contact connections, discussions with many members of the Huber family. Some people believe, especially in Austria, that Johann Huber was the first member. This is nothing close to true. The very first member, the very first Austrian to become an LDS person was a woman who left a town close to Innsbruck and went to Munich, probably for purposes of employment, and was baptized there, never returned to Austria. The second was Brother Hostlinger, mentioned before, who was the first Austrian baptized LDS in Austria. He remained there for the rest of his life. The next seven are people from the province of Upper Austria. Every one of them went to Munich and was baptized there. Once again, most likely because they went there for occupational purposes, as did Martin Gangelmeier, already mentioned, for example, who is a carpenter, baptized in Munich, went to the United States, married in the Salt Lake Temple, was called on a mission to return to Germany and Austria. The 10th of these stars represents Johann Huber, so he's nowhere close to the first member of the church in Austria, but obviously will play what most Austrians today believe is the principal role, and I would join them in that belief. Here's a picture taken from the air after World War II of the house. The neighborhood's called Parts in the town of Rottenbach, and the house has looked that way really for about 250 years. The dwelling part of the house is the northern portion there, actually torn down and rebuilt by Johann Huber in 1927. Other than that, you have rooms there for the wagons, the grains, the animals, all kinds of storage. The entry is through a portal right there, and this road leads about 600 yards over to the church in Rottenbach, where Johann Huber was baptized on his birthday in 1861. It was in this church that the conflict began that drove him from his native religion. 1899, there was a political election going on, and Johann Huber had allied himself with the Liberal Party, a pro-German party for that matter, but he was a very loyal Austrian taxpayer, as he reminded officials in many letters, a 3-year veteran of the Austrian military, a good citizen. And at this time, he is 38 years old, in the prime of life, has an excellent farm, things are doing very well for him. But the assistant vicar at the time attacked him from the pulpit and said, Johann Huber here is a liberal and he's trying to destroy the Catholic Church. That was, of course, false. Johann Huber later wrote to the newspaper, "I had no opportunity to stand up and say, 'You're wrong, you're lying.'" He says you can't do that in church. You can't respond to the priest who's at the pulpit. But Huber did respond by demanding in a very, very long 1,400-word letter to the editor, printed in correct German, had to be a little bit corrected. His own German was less than perfect. He demanded that the Catholic Church issue an apology from the very same pulpit. They never did. He said, "If you do not apologize, then I will not return to the Catholic Church." So at that very time, and we don't believe in coincidences, do we? Martin Gangelmeier arrives. He's there to visit his parents. Gangelmeier is 9 years younger than Huber, but they get together. We don't know if Gangelmeier heard about Huber and went to him or vice versa, but Huber was in a position now to listen to things about the restored gospel, and he recognized some very important differences between that and the New Testament, with which he was very well acquainted. He had a 1705 Bible the family still owns today, and he knew it very well. Gangelmeier left, went back to Munich where he was stationed, and Huber followed him over there, was baptized then in March of 1900, returned to Austria as one of only two men with Haslinger, who knew nothing about him, and found that his life was going to be very, very difficult. Immediately he was asked to recant, to give up this new religion and return to his native Catholic faith. Huber had a number of employees. As the owner and manager of a large estate farm, he employed anywhere from 5 to 15 people at a time. These were all young people, single people, and he preached enthusiastically this new gospel to those people. One by one, several of them joined the church. Others were driven away when neighbors said, "This man is a dangerous person. He's obviously a heretic, having left the Catholic Church," or having left the faith, not yet the church. Huber gathered his followers there, very few of them, together in the granary. The granary is in the second story of the northwest corner of the building, still existing in beautiful condition today. He made no big theater out of this. Some of the neighbors talked about how they would walk by on Sunday and hear the singing of psalms, what they referred to as our Mormon hymns. And in May 1902, the records of the German mission show that a branch was established in Rottenbach with Johann Huber as the president. Here's one of the heroes in our story, if you want to represent this from the Catholic side. The assistant pastor, now the pastor at the time, Josef Eppelbauer, is a 90-year-old who just doesn't have the strength anymore to fight something like this. But his assistant, Karl Schuffecker, was very, very strong. We have a mixture in both men, Johann Huber and Karl Schuffecker. They're both loaded with confidence in the conflict, and both of them are a mixture of humility and hubris. I think we can say that Karl Schuffecker, he's the one who preached against Johann Huber in church. He's the one who essentially drove Huber from the Catholic Church. Here's the meeting house there. Very humble situation. Now, the rumor's gone around that young Johann Huber Jr., he's 9 years old at the time, sat at that far window, the one in the middle, and watched for police or somebody coming up the road during their Sunday meeting, somebody who might be bent on disturbing things. Even Johann Huber Jr. in 2 autobiographies never says anything about that. So we have some fact and fancy in this story. And according to Gerlinde Wambacher, the current owner of the property and an adoptive great-granddaughter, the idea was that if somebody actually did come up the road there, alarm would be given. They'd go down through this trap door into the door you can see below, out the back door, and this is the last house in the community, so out into the forests and disappear before anybody could bother them. We have no evidence whatever in all these documents that any such thing ever happened. A new opponent. Schuffecker leaves, and Josef Schachinger appears on the scene. This man is a veteran Catholic priest, ordained in 1878. He's been in 4 different positions already. We don't know for sure if he knew about the Huber conflict when he came to Rottenbach, but he was a man who was not afraid of battle and of conflict, and he immediately requires that Huber return to the faith and attend church with his family. Now, Schockinger arrives in a bad mood for another important reason. He has terrible feet. His back is killing him. He's already asked the Catholic Church for a premature medical retirement. Has not been granted that. In any case, he is in a bad mood, and that's going to work against Johann Huber for a number of years now. So he asked Johann Huber to come back. Huber says, "No, you haven't apologized to me. You won't see me again." Well, in the meantime, Huber is also an LDS person, has no interest in returning to the Catholic faith. He is, though, officially a registered Catholic. Once again, the neighbors are hammering on his employees, "Don't work for this man. Don't anybody go work for this man. Oh, the pay is good, and he seems to be nice to employees, but the danger is spiritual with that man." So now the first big battle comes when Franziska Huber, the youngest of the children, is born at the end of 1901. And it doesn't take long before Pastor Schockinger realizes that this child is not going to be brought to church for the baptism. Johann Huber says, "Over my dead body," essentially. And this becomes a matter of tremendous conflict over the next 10 months. It's going to last all the way to November. It's going to involve the church, the courts, the police, and about 70 different documents are going to course back and forth among these different entities. But he loses the conflict. He's fined relatively small fines. He has plenty of money, so he pays those, but it hurts his pride. And the baptism does not take place in the church. The assistant pastor, a new man, Ludwig Erker, comes into the home and supposedly under verbal attack by Huber conducts the baptism of little Franziska, who's nearly 1 year old now. Second controversy. This is the school. Johann Jr. is now 10 years old. His father says, "Don't go to confession with your schoolmates." Now, confession was conducted wherein the Catholic priest or the vicar who taught the religion class in the school, which is true all over Austria and today is still the case, took them then over to the church and forced them to line up for confession to the priest. Huber says, "Forget it. That doesn't work. That's not part of the Bible. You can't show me anywhere in the Bible where confession is taught by Christ or the apostles." So, once again, this goes to the court. The pastor, Schockinger, pushes this to the nth degree and says the law requires him to raise his children in the faith, and Huber responds by saying, "I'm out of the church. I'm out of here." He goes to the county and says, "I officially withdraw," which the county by law must allow him to do. But in the meantime, whereas he says, "Now my children don't have to go to confession," the courts say, "Yes, they do, because you belong to a religion not recognized by the state. Your wife is still Catholic, and law requires that the children be raised in her faith. They must go to confession." So Huber responds by having his wife withdraw from the Catholic Church. And first of all, he writes a letter that he says is hers, and Pastor Schockinger says it's a falsification, it's a forgery, and it was. It was a forgery. So another one is written, and this time the signature is that of Teresa Huber, except it's not, because that too was forged. So Johann Huber is not a perfect person. In any case, once again, Huber wins the battle this time because the courts say now that both parents have withdrawn from the Catholic Church. By the way, Frau Huber is now Protestant officially. Okay, but now Huber has arranged, at least he's won the opportunity to get his family away from the Catholic Church, so nobody can force his children to go to confession anymore. Here's a record from the school board. 13 different times the school board of the county met to consider the problem of Johann Huber Jr. not attending confession. Thanks to the Austrian bureaucratic system, that's where I got my 800 documents. Nothing in Austria, well, the Austrians invented red tape. The Germans are nothing compared to Austrians in red tape. 1904, things are going to go better now because Huber finds a great hero, a lady in Vienna who's looking for an international story, writes to him and says, "Would you please respond in detail to each of these 8 questions?" He does, writes a gigantic letter to her. She prints almost the same thing without change in major cities such as Salzburg, in Agram or Zagreb, and in Vienna. It could be also in Prague and Budapest. And Huber really lets rip on the Catholic Church. He tells exactly what they did to him that was wrong. And this is a great victory for Huber, but it bounces back to haunt him again. As it turns out, the regional newspapers pick this up, and guess who reads it? The county commissioners and the police. So now the question goes out, what's going on in Rothenbach? You've got some Mormons there, you have some anti-Catholics, you have missionary activity. That's forbidden by the official imperial law of 1868. So discrete inquiries are to be held by police agencies in 10 or 12 different cities, towns, and this is what they want to know. Who are the Mormons? Are there non-Mormons attending the meetings? Are the Mormons proselytizing? That's against the law to officially try to entice somebody away from their church to another one. Are the Huber children taking Mormon literature to school? That also is against imperial law. So the courts are the courts and the police are very, very correct in what they do. So Huber says, I'm not doing this, I'm not preaching to anybody. That's not true. Huber was preaching, in fact, the newspapers report that he's preaching at county fairs, and he's preaching in Gasthof, in inns, wherever he can find an audience, and a good audience is where men are drinking. Well, this all burns out, basically. Huber keeps going, and as Sister Kedema told us, he makes a few converts here and there, and by 1910, he's got about 10 of those with 3 or 4 of his children. Schockinger finally retires. He's lost the war here, but he has determined, among other things, now we've sold into 20 members in the branch, but Schockinger possibly has been successful in that he didn't lose all the Catholics in Rothenbach, 1,200 people. They didn't all flee to this new church. So perhaps Schockinger is a victor in his own right, a very capable, very dedicated Catholic priest. You ought to see the letters he wrote to his bishop. Those are marvelous. He doesn't have to be politically correct like he does when he writes to the courts. So he pulls out all the stops in asking his bishop for help. Schockinger's successor says, I don't care about this conflict. So here we go. 10 years later, World War I has come and gone. One of Huber's sons dies coming back from Italy in 1918. But we have a marvelous event. 2 brothers from Vienna, these were Hirschmanns, converted in a little side street, Mollardgasse, in 1909 in their smithy. Get to know some of the Huber daughters during leaves during World War I, where they went to the hog farm and met these 2 beautiful young ladies. And those 2 with Franz Rosner married in May of 1920, and we have now 3 big families. So from this point, the Huber family will only grow. 1938 picture here with Johann Huber in the middle. Now he's 77, 78 years old. He makes it to 1941, where at the age of 80, he climbs up in an apple tree, falls down while harvesting apples, suffers some major internal injuries, and he succumbs to those in the family kitchen, where they're keeping good care of him 3 days later. The fact that he is now still a good friend and respected fellow farmer in this small community, he's weathered all the storms. He has succeeded in maintaining his religion and his integrity. The entire town gathers at the home, which is pictured at the very back of the photograph there, and marches 600 yards to the church to bury him, not in the Catholic cemetery, you know the rules, but at the edge of that cemetery next to his wife, just a couple feet beyond the environs of the cemetery. Mit Sang und Klang, as the Germans would say, with all kinds of wonderful music. We've seen a picture of this, I guess, the building. Somebody said it wasn't President Kimball, it was President Benson who dedicated. President Kimball dedicated the one we saw in the previous picture. But here's the outcropping of all this. My book is in the hands of a publisher now. They're reviewing this. Hope they don't ask for a lot of editing. That's a painful process. 800 documents, newspaper articles. What a marvelous story. What tremendous detail we see in this man who will not say no after he has embraced the restored gospel. Now, he will not die a martyr to the cause by any means, but a tremendous hero in my eyes. This is Martin Gangelmeier. We know from many of Gangelmeier's letters that Huber wrote to him and said, I'm in trouble here. I'm the only Mormon here. People are attacking me in every direction. Help. What are we going to do to suggest something for me to do? And by the way, the term emigration occurs only one time in all of Huber's writings. He's going to stay there. He belongs there. But this is what Gangelmeier says, and I believe this is prophetic. It will someday be revealed just who accepted the testimony of Jesus Christ and maintained it in the face of hatred and mockery from the ignorant masses. Martin Gangelmeier dies in Los Angeles, 1939. Well, we have a tremendous outgrowth of this. Everybody in Austria knows about Johann Huber. Many of them know or are married to or descended from many of his children. One of the family Historians tells us there could be 250 descendants. Could I ask those in this room who are descended from Johann Huber to stand, please? I got an email this morning. Thank you for coming. We have here the oldest granddaughter of Johann Huber and the oldest grandson of Johann Huber and the oldest great-granddaughter of Johann Huber. We're in the 5th generation now. So, and you belong there too. And on top of that, right here in Provo, at Brigham Young University, a professor of astronomy, Eric Hirschman. Thank you very much. Now, marvelous trip this has been for me. I've spent a number of nights on the Huber estate. I've been treated in such a friendly manner by all these members of the family. What an adventure for me to walk in the footsteps. I walked one day from his home to the church in Haag, where they moved the branch in 1927, renamed it the Haag am Haushoek branch. That was the official end of the Rotenbach branch. I walked that one afternoon and asked myself, how would this be to be an 80-year-old man, 80-year-old Johann Huber, walking this in the last days of his life? We have great heroes in our church. I hope you know and read about some. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.